Watching TV has changed over time. Streaming has become the new norm. That's why Golden State Media Concepts television podcast dives headfirst to the world of cord cutting. Want to be on the loop of what's hot in Netflix? Or if it's not a preference, what about original shows in Hulu? We've got you covered. Join us as we fill in the blanks and talk about movies to stream and what show you should be binging. This is the Golden State Media Concepts television podcast.
Thank you for tuning in to the GSMC television podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Casey. So, I hope everyone is doing well today. So, as usual, we have our 4 segments lined up, and it is very similar to what we've kind of been doing the past couple weeks here. So, we'll be starting off with The Circle. As of now, I'm definitely going to talk about episode 10 of season 2. There's a chance I might talk about episode 11 as well, but I definitely think these past 2 episodes, there's been quite a bit of content to talk about in each individual episode, so the first segment might just be dedicated towards the solely towards the 10th episode. Then we'll be shifting over to Your Honor, episodes 7 and 8. And then after that, for our third segment, we'll be talking about episode 6 of Good Girls, and then we'll be ending things with episode 2 of The Bad Batch, gearing up for what will be this day's drop of episode 3 of The Bad Batch. Alright, so just jumping right into it. As I said, we're definitely talking about episode 10 of The Circle for season 2. So, we saw a lot of the new setup for the new arc last episode, which obviously this new arc has to very much deal with a Chloe versus Kat situation, although I don't think Kat sees it that way. But I feel like from a viewer's perspective, that's kind of the best way to put it. Or more so, I guess it's the Kardashians versus Kat. Actually, that would probably be the better way to say it. Like I said, I noticed this a while back, and I've been saying it the past couple podcasts, but every couple episodes is a new arc for The Circle. It's kind of funny that you don't see any arcs run super long any more than really like 2 episodes. In the beginning, you had the Savannah versus Terralisha arc. Or I guess you got the intro, Savannah versus Terralisha, then Terralisha versus Courtney, and, it just kind of continues to go from there. Then you had the little Emily arc, and now, you have this little Kat arc, which, at this point in time, it definitely very much seems like, it seems like Kat's going home. I made a post on TV Time about this exact thing, because obviously the episode ends in a cliffhanger. But you know what? I guess I'm getting ahead of myself. So let's backtrack a little bit. So this episode, the entertainment piece, the twist, whatever you want to call it, is the whole democracy twist. Which is kind of, I think this is the thing. It's the same thing with Big Brother. Being locked in a place, and especially with The Circle where you're locked in by yourself, they have to do everything that they, possibly can to make it as entertaining as possible. With that being said, that's exactly what this is, the democracy twist. So, the democracy twist starts off, right off the bat with, like, a Ward 1 player who you want, to get a gift. And so, obviously, Courtney won that. I think that's, pretty telling, because I feel like, that just goes to show that Courtney is really well liked in The Circle. In addition to Courtney, I think Chloe is also really well liked, which shows in a whole other, way, mostly to do with the ratings. But I mean, obviously, River is Courtney's closest ally. Chloe's also lumped in there, but Courtney is clearly the brains of that alliance. But that's not to discount River, because River obviously is really smart too. I think as far as catfishes go, I'd probably say River is one of the better catfishes we've seen in the game between these both seasons. So I do really very much enjoy that, and it is also really funny that the catfish is someone who is, like 50, what is he, like 52, I think? So I very much do enjoy that fact, but I guess also at the same time, he is an author. But I would definitely say in the beginning, he created a pretty solid character, and he stuck to that character for a while. But I feel like the past couple episodes especially, you can see a shift or development in the character, in which the character is becoming more calculated, which we'll get to shortly. We definitely see that the character is a little bit more cocky, and the sob story, which obviously it was a real part of Lee's life when he was younger, that kind of got pushed by the to the wayside, and you don't really see a whole lot of that anymore. But River still has certain staples, and obviously everyone can identify the Rainbow Heart. So yeah, like I said, I think River's definitely one of the better catfishes in the game. Don't get me wrong, I think Delisa is also too, playing as Trevor, because when there was any and all suspicions, they got stamped out pretty quickly. Even there was a small hint of it, and I think the catfish paranoia will always be a thing, but yeah, we'll also get to that towards the end. We had an interesting conversation between Kat and Mitchell. They're both straight shooters. They both came in at the same time. They both can sense that each other is very much genuine. And Mitchell finally shared that he thinks Courtney is the Joker, which we saw that last episode, and now he's saying it to someone else. And that is the thing, is that, you know what, I think for a little bit we weren't seeing too much of Mitchell, but I think Mitchell has a really good read on the game, and I really wasn't sure what to expect from Mitchell, but I'm very much enjoying Mitchell's presence. We also got another conversation from Mitchell this episode, in which Mitchell and John got to meet, which obviously John is played by the recent evictee Jack and recent evictee Lisa, and they had a really interesting conversation. I think they went a tad bit too far, but it was very, very fun from an entertainment perspective, where they mentioned the musical aspect of his game, and he did not buy it. And that's just another thing that I really do like about Mitchell, is I you know what, it sometimes really is hard to read people, especially over text, and it's part of the reason I don't really play any of the online reality games that are all text-based. I like to play the ones that are, face-to-face. And so I very much enjoy their back and forth. Because once again, Mitchell was able to spot, the kind of bullshit in the situation. But I think overall he does really like John, thinks he's a genuine, real person, but thinks that, someone might have told him the music thing. I mean, let's be real, though, also about psychics, is that psychics aren't real. They're just very, very, very good vocal and body language readers. And they do their research. So anyway, we also had a Trevor and Courtney conversation that was also interesting, because Courtney laid it all out for Trevor and was really trying to play Trevor, assuming that the relationship was very authentic between Trevor and Chloe, about Kat kind of targeting Chloe. And so, yeah, that got Trevor a little heated, but I think Trevor is a smart player and realizes that he more specifically, or she, given that he's really played by Delisa, kind of needs Kat around, and they can, really talk more open and genuine. We also had the second part of the whole Democracy Day, which was their campaign posters, and that was yet again another fun challenge. I think everyone was chosen by production very specifically for their friendships, and how their relationships overall went. And so that's how, and also people left clear signifiers. And so I think with that, I don't think anyone got it wrong, but everyone was able to peg each of the campaign posters. And then we had at the very end, Trevor really painted River in a very negative light, which was kind of stunning because, at least from a viewer's perspective, it really seems like Courtney is playing the, we'll say, quote-unquote, more disingenuous game. But that's who Trevor was given, and that's who Trevor painted as the target. They were the only person that really did that, and I honestly, if I was in the game, I think I would have done the same thing. I don't see myself as like a villain player, but it's strategy. It's just good tactics as well. You need to set people up. And Courtney, River, and Chloe are a very tight trio in a game that only has 7 people left in it, and we're getting really, really close to finale night. And so they almost literally have a majority, and once you have this next boot, they will have exactly half. And you really need to separate that duo up because they've got a strong contendership to win it all. Moving on, we also had a conversation between John and Trevor that was interesting. They very much bonded over family and grandchildren. I always did like Jack when he was playing Emily, and I liked his little quirky moments, that were out of the character, what we actually saw about him in his apartment. But with Jack, I think him and Lisa together are they're a weird pairing that we never knew that we actually wanted in the circle. And honestly, I think they're playing a great game together as a character they were forced into rather than these characters they wanted to play. I think Lisa really fumbled on playing Lance, because there's so much you can do about Lance, and she should have used that to her advantage, but she unfortunately didn't. But yeah, I really like how they're portraying John. They have his backstory pretty well planned out, and they're making all the right connections in this game. But unfortunately, this game, as much as I do enjoy it, the game is wildly unbalanced. And I've said it before too. You can't have someone like John, and granted, John is a second chance, 2 people playing a second chance, but you can't have someone like John come into the game in the last 1, 2, 3, 4, in the last 4 to 5 days of the game when it's been going on for about 2 weeks. You have no chance, especially for the people like Chloe, like River, like Courtney, like Trevor, who have literally been in it since the beginning. So, we obviously got the ratings again. I figured that Kat, Mitchell, and Courtney were going to be at the bottom. I was hoping that it would be Courtney at the very bottom, but I kind of figured it would be Kat, and then I was really hoping that it would be Courtney next, but it wasn't. It was Mitchell. River in the middle, which made perfect sense. And then at the top, Trevor and Chloe. Now, I really actually wasn't sure how the top would end out, but Chloe, once again, for the second time being the number 1 influencer, but also I think the 3rd overall being the highest rated. That's the thing. Chloe has put herself in a great social situation. She's great socially. She's in the right alliance. She's got friends on, in a couple alliances, really. her tactics and strategies are not the greatest in the game, but honestly, her social game and her influencer spots will speak for themselves when she's in finale night. I think the only way that she would probably lose is if Courtney and River are both in the end with her as well. Then Courtney and River could potentially snake, or actually shouldn't use the word snake, but they would earn it. They would potentially take away enough votes from her to cost her the game. So I think with everything that's going on, as the influencers were talking, they both agreed that Courtney was safe. You had Chloe that really wanted to protect River. Trevor could sense that, but Trevor did not really want River in the game. They both understood the negatives with Kat. And it was kind of like Trevor's group, which was Kat and Mitchell, and Chloe's group, which was Courtney and River. They both have their three, and this is going to really spell out the rest of the game. I think Kat will end up going home, but if they were smart, they'll flip the script on River, or if they want to make a very interesting twist that still isn't the greatest, they would get rid of Mitchell. But I think everyone would be less hurt, generally speaking, if Kat went home, and I really think Kat's going to go home in the end. I'm just very much curious who Kat would visit if she does end up going. Yeah. So very, very, very interesting. They really do need to realize, I think there's only one or two more eliminations, and we're going into a six-person standings next, and it's literally going to be Chloe and her three, so Chloe and River and Courtney. Then you're going to have Trevor and Mitchell and John. And honestly, I think despite John realizing the dangers of Courtney and River, I feel like John might actually go with their side, which then means that Mitchell's probably next. If not John, but I could see them taking out Mitchell because I think I don't know if they think that Mitchell is a player and perceptive yet, but I think that's what's going to end up happening, is the next person to go will be Mitchell, and if there's one more elimination after that, I could see it being John, but the smart thing to do is these next two eliminations need to be very strategic, and they need to get these big players out, because once you're in the end, I mean, they've all played decent games, but it could potentially be anyone's game depending on how things are argued. So on that note, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about Your Honor, episodes 7 and 8.
Want to know the latest and hottest music hitting the airwaves? Don't be left out. Listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Music Podcast. Keith keeps you on the loop with everything you need to know from pop, rock, hip-hop, and the top 40. And we'll throw in news of your favorite artists, concert and tour dates, and so much more. Listen no further, because this is the gold standard in music podcast.
All right, and we are back. So, we have already talked about The Circle Season 2, Episode 10, and now we are shifting over to Your Honor, Episodes 7 and 8. So, we have now hit the halfway point, or more so, more over the halfway point of, Your Honor. Things are starting to really escalate. It is a very sticky situation in which it's very hard to figure out what the heck is going to happen between now and the end, given that there are only another 2 episodes after this, and things really have escalated these past couple episodes. So, we obviously saw at the end of episode 6 that the blackmailer was killed. We had Michael with the information that Carlo was about to be busted and that he was going to do what he could to potentially help him. But if Michael's dead, then he can't help Jimmy. And Carlo will go down and he will essentially lose another son because in Louisiana they have the death penalty. And he already was brought up on some pretty bad crimes before, so his record really is not looking good. So, yeah, and this one's actually in regards to death. So, I think we started out with Jimmy, like, rushing to the hotel, because they live at that hotel that's, I guess, in the center of New Orleans. And he kept trying to call Carlo, but Carlo was jamming out to his music. He had put a fentanyl patch on his friend, so his friend is like really high and really out of it. But he's ignoring. And so like watching this, I was like, you know, he's going to potentially kill his friend. Or if his friend doesn't end up ODing on fentanyl, which I guess the fentanyl patch, assuming you're not using multiple fentanyl patches, I guess you actually wouldn't OD, but he could potentially make his friend a drug addict. And so we obviously saw the raid on the hotel in which Carlo gets busted, and his friend has the bag. And so now his friend's on the run. So I think, if I remember correctly, that was like easily $100,000 worth of drugs that they had. And now his friend has already used one of them. The drugs were paid for, so he could OD, but he also has a crap ton of drugs. So I don't really think this is going to end very well for his friend, especially given that a lot of the stuff that's been introduced in the show obviously has to come back full circle. It's just a matter of how is it coming back. And that is yet another really crazy point that we'll have to see play out, hopefully in the final 2 episodes. So, Michael, he's been doing a lot of crazy things, and I think, given that he was established very early on, it reminds me very much of like how Star Wars in Episode 4, A New Hope, established the Han Solo character. Except for Michael Desiato, it is the opposite. So Han Solo was very quickly established kind of as ruthless. He's a bounty hunter, and he killed that guy Greedo pretty quickly. Whereas Michael, we saw him in the beginning as an honorable person, a man with principles, and he would go, to crazy lengths to give people a fair trial and to really figure out and get down to the truth of the matter, which we saw him do it at Famale's house when they were talking to the police officer about the shotgun homes. And he even wanted his son to get termed in, but he did realize that his son probably wouldn't make it in prison. Whether he would die at the hands of the Baxter family or he would get potentially the death penalty, although I don't think he would have gotten the death penalty because it would have been manslaughter, but he did leave the scene of the crime, which would stack up on a lot more charges. So anyway, I think ultimately Michael Desiato is a good person. He's just doing bad things, which is actually, that's a quote that was used quite often in Good Girls, which is our next segment too. So we obviously had like a long sequence of Michael and the right-hand man of Jimmy hiding the body, and all that blood, and he was going to even potentially kill the guy too. Which I know a lot of people were comparing this moment to Breaking Bad, but I think the thing is that if there was any other actor who was playing Michael Desiato, there would not be one comparison to Breaking Bad. So I do think it's unfair that this show often gets looked at a little bit negatively for its comparisons to Breaking Bad, when really the only comparison that they really share is that at the end of the day, you say that it's an anti-hero and that Bryan Cranston is the main character. But very different things. I think Walter very much became a bad person as the show went on, whereas Michael Desiato is not a bad person, and even when he makes bad decisions and that have negative effects, he still tries to do the right thing, or not necessarily the right thing, but what he can do to make it up as best as possible. I think a good example of that was the whole Kofi Jones incident when Kofi got picked up, because obviously he never wanted anyone to actually get hooked on for the murder. He just wanted someone to destroy the evidence. He got Lee to take on the trial. And not only that, but Lee, who was a very high-profile lawyer working for a very big firm, who then ended up quitting the firm, she did it for free. And she really, really went to the lengths to do everything even after Kofi's death. So, I mean, I think that's the thing. Michael is not a bad guy, but he is doing bad things. We obviously saw the whole thing with the brain on the floor, which was, oh my God, crazy. But he covered it up really well to Adam. How he said, the butcher shop, and it's just probably an extra piece. So then his son fed him the brain to the dog. And I was just like, oh, goodness. He also covered up his scratch, too, to his son as he was trying to burn the clothes in their guest house. And he said that, he's playing with Django, and, it was a cut to the face, which, yet again, that was another thing people were comparing to Breaking Bad. But once again, I really feel like it does the show a great injustice, by comparing it to Breaking Bad just because of the actor, and it's an anti-hero. I mean, would you compare The Sopranos to Breaking Bad? It's organized crime. It is an anti-hero. Like, no. Tony Soprano, yeah, he's a bad guy. I think he's got a number of issues. Jimmy, even in this show, bad guy as well. So we saw that as the trial starts to get set up, the Michael, I don't know what the legal or technical term would be, but he wants to become the judge, so he applies for it, but he ultimately loses it, in which then he sets up that judge, and it yet again is another very uncomfortable situation that feels very much realistic. She only had 2 drinks, but that is the crazy thing about drinking, is that sure, you could take 2 shots of alcohol and then leave, but keep in mind that while you might not be visibly intoxicated or slurring your words or, having trouble with balance or vision or anything like that, 2 shots, especially, or if you've had a double of each, 1 shot is an hour's worth of alcohol. And you have 2 of them, your odds are you're probably over the legal limit. It does not matter who you are. At the end of the day, if you get pulled over and you get tested, even if there's not a single sign of visible intoxication, you're done. And she is a very high up judge. So it's also another thing of you had the corrupt cops, and she is also a black woman. And so there's a lot of factors at play that feel very much realistic for the scene. But I do think ultimately, I know ultimately it was a setup by Michael and Jimmy. So, next, for the next episode, we saw kind of the aftermath of it, and Sarah, the judge who got, the DUI, they want her, I think, to, just take the rap, go to rehab, and, if that's everything, then she'll be done and she'll be able to go back to her job as a judge. But if she fights it and things get worse, she could potentially lose her license to be a judge, and her career is over. And this is yet again another situation in which Michael had to do what he had to do to protect his son, which also he's protecting himself in this instance as well. But he's really potentially screwed this girl over. And, there was the instance where she was, still going to fight it, but he's like, oh, I guess you haven't seen, and he shows her the bystander video, of her, so her face is all over the place. So she potentially tries to make this much bigger than it really is. She will potentially get into a lot of trouble. So she ends up backing out, and she has to step away from the Carlo Baxter case. Now, the very interesting thing about this is, and I kept saying this when I was watching with my family, is that it doesn't really make a ton of sense, given that Carlo killed Kofi, and Kofi was connected to Judge Desiato's car being stolen. Now, granted, not exactly directly related, but they are indirectly related, and I think that could cause a lot of issues at the end of the day. So I'm actually a little surprised that, they allowed him to be on the court case. We also had an interesting scene as he gets ready for court where he's laying out his clothes. Everything's kind of like prim and proper. And I think, once again, talking about the intro of the show, how they introduce Michael, it's this kind of juxtaposition of Michael is considered to be a very well-respected, honorable person. And I think that's exactly what it is like, look at this guy who is, and I might not actually be able to articulate this very well at the moment. I had it really well in my head earlier when I was taking notes. But I do think that scene's purpose was to show that Michael is a guy who is not only prepared, but he's a good guy, and he's a clean guy, but now look what he's become. Even Sarah says right in the beginning of the episode that, of all the corrupt people in this town, in the court system especially, there's only 2 people that aren't corrupt, which is obviously Sarah, and which is obviously why she really wanted to take down the Baxter family. But she also says Michael is as well, and that's the thing, is that Michael, this is exactly why anything and everything that is a little bit suspicious, including the whole dinner scene in which Django barfs up the piece of brain, which no one sees. It's yet again another instance in which the dog does something in front of a group of people. But that's the thing. It doesn't matter how many of these little things Michael does that makes him suspicious. Everyone knows him and has known him for decades to be the honorable, respectful, fight for justice kind of man. But obviously after we start hearing all of the testimonies, it starts to become a little bit too much for Michael, so he causes a recess, and you get to see him, really taking a break. But yeah, I mean, that's another thing, is that I really think he's not bad, because if he was bad, I don't think he would have taken a moment to really stop, because these things are seriously weighing on his mind. Now, we also had an interesting part where we had the one older lady who, one of the jurors, they kind of, someone left a note behind about self-defense in prison, and I guess, I don't know if it's actually true, but I guess there's really no such thing as self-defense in prison, because just straight up, you're not allowed to fight. So, she leaves an anonymous note, and he's able to later compare that, and so he probably put 2 and 2 together, or not probably, he did put 2 and 2 together, and ultimately got her dismissed on grounds of doing outside research, which is very interesting, because I don't quite understand how that happened. I don't know if he assumed she was searching that, or when they had their phones, he did that, because they never really actually showed that exact moment happen with the phones. But yeah, still interesting nonetheless. Felt really bad for the lady, and she seemed like she was going to fight it. It seems like she was kind of catching on that Michael might have been involved. But yes, very, very unfortunate that happened. But it's another win for Michael at the end of the day, as he needs to get Carlo off. One little other thing, we saw a small little storyline play out in which Adam, got into NYU, but he lied to Franny. We haven't seen Franny in like 5 episodes now. She was in the first couple episodes. The last time we had seen her was, I think, like the time Adam admitted his guilt to her. So she's one of 3 people that knows the truth, the actual truth about what happened to Rocco. But once she figured out that Adam was lying because of Michael, she thought something might have been up, and she caught him and Franny, which I'm sure is going to play out in a very big way between next episode, or even next and the finale. On that note, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll be talking about Good Girls episode 6.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
All right, and we are back. So, we have already talked about The Circle, Season 2, Episode 10. We then shifted over to Your Honor, Episodes 7 and 8. And so now we are really changing gears and going over to Good Girls, Season 4, Episode 6. So, the episode, obviously, each episode always has a previously on, and the very interesting thing about the previously on we got to see was that we got Tyler again. Now, I could be wrong, but I think, for those who don't really remember, Tyler worked security at the Frugal Mart, or whatever it was called, that Annie used to work in the very early seasons. I don't think we've actually seen Tyler since Season 2. Probably midway through Season 2, maybe closer to the end, but I mean, it's been a while. It's essentially been 2 full seasons if you go from mid 1 to mid another, so mid 2 to 3 and mid 3 to 4. So we haven't seen him in pretty much 2 full seasons. So that was the interesting part. We got to see him in the previews. So the episode itself starts out in media res. And so when for those who don't know, in media res just means, I think it's a Latin phrase. It just means like in the middle of, essentially. A lot of like film noir movies from like, the 30s and 40s and 50s, they always used to start off in media res, and it's a way to hook the people to figure, like, to be like, wait, what's going on? Like, and so then you watch how everything unfolds. I feel like a lot of like heist type movies do stuff like that too. But yeah, I mean, in media res is used all over the place. So anyway, it starts in media res with the Tyler walking into, getting ready for his day, and then walking to the jewelry store with donuts and coffee as there is a robbery in place. And then you very quickly find out that it's actually Annie, Ruby, and Beth. And you're like, what? Why are they robbing a jewelry store? So then it starts by goes into the 3 days, before, and, this was something that I think I might have also said in the podcast a couple, episodes ago when I was talking about Good Girls, but also was something that I've been thinking a lot too, is that, for the most part, these girls have been kind of sitting comfortable because they've been making a fair amount of money washing, and creating counterfeit money. So, that you don't even really think about their actual problems anymore, the problems that have literally gotten them into this life of crime, with one of the more notable instances being Ruby. Now, I mean, Ruby lives in, I feel like, a very normal home, but the issue with Ruby is that her daughter is sick, and now, I know for a fact this is something I mentioned in one of the previous podcasts, but I wasn't sure if her daughter was still sick or if because of the transplant and other stuff that she was fine now. But this episode just reestablished again that her daughter still does take medicine, and with this medicine, the medicine has already gone up recently, but it's also just gone up again, and it's becoming very, very expensive. Beth obviously lives in a sort of more upper middle class home. She has 4 kids. Right now, she doesn't really have much of a source of income except for her, I don't know what you call it, the arts and crafts store, that's what I'm going to call it, that she works at, which they're only ever there, well, we only ever see them there when they're creating counterfeit money. We don't actually see her working anymore. I mean, there's really no reason to see her working unless someone were to visit her during working hours. But obviously, Dean was in jail, and all their assets were frozen from that. And then Annie lives in an apartment. She should, generally speaking, have the lowest cost of living between the three girls and expenses. She kind of eats junk food. Ben's not really with her all that much, so she's really just one person. So I'm very, very much curious what the heck she squanders her money on. Now, we did see a couple episodes ago she spent quite a bit of money at the school auction that Ben goes to. But other than that, I mean, yeah, it just once again goes that they reestablish they're all still very much having financial issues, with the most reasonable one being Ruby. I guess also with 4 kids, it does make sense that Beth has a slightly larger house, but I mean, they could really downgrade if they're in that much of a financial crisis, which we do know that they are, but obviously some people just aren't willing to do what they need to do. So we, on the other side of things, we saw that in Annie's personal life, she's actually really starting to make a lot of strides, as, a human being. She still has her moments of weakness, though, as she tries to hide the whole GED prep thing from Ben, as she did quit it before, and I believe that was last season. She told Ben that she was doing it, and then she quit it, and then I believe Ben later found out. But Ben gets suspicious, and he gets protective, because he always thinks that Annie's lying to him. But for the most part, aside from working with, Rio and his crew, Annie hasn't really lied to Ben. She's probably a little too open and honest with him, as, she is his parent. Then we obviously saw that they, tried to, get money out of the government as an advance, given that they're all going to be set up in WitPro, which really is not going to be the case unless there's been some sort of news that I'm familiar with that the show's getting canceled or renewed for another season, which I'm still a little bit behind because obviously we're talking about episode 6, but there have been, I think there's 9 or 10 episodes that have come out so far, and there's going to be 13, I think, for this season. So anyway, they tried to get the advance. The government people said no. We saw the interesting thing with Phoebe, as she really was into Beth's makeup. And we saw the montage sequence, which I'm assuming are all real too, but it was all condensed for effect. There's something about Phoebe, and I think it's sort of a trope that we do see with other agents and other people like her, in which they don't have lives, they don't really have friends, work is their life. And so I think with Phoebe, she really kind of likes the girls and kind of looks up to them, and I really do think it is a situation, as I said with Your Honor in the past segment, that, Ruby and Stan say it all the time, but, they are good people who are doing bad things. Annie, I don't think by any sense of the imagination Annie is bad. I wouldn't exactly say she's the best person. She's just trying to get by. And so she kind of does what she does. I feel like she's very real. And I feel like, and I don't know because I'm not a girl, and I haven't really seen any comments on it, but I know a lot of people love Annie's character. They think she's really funny. But I feel like Annie is very much a real character. And I think she's written really well. She struggles with a lot in her life, and a lot of it had to do with, being a teenager who is pregnant. And not to say that, can ruin your life or hurt you, but everyone deals with certain things differently, and it definitely was a setback for her. She had to drop out of high school, she had to work, whatever dead-end job she had to work to pay the bills and pay for her kid. But that's why I'm actually really enjoying, while it's very tiny, I am enjoying the Annie storyline as she tries to get her life together. I don't know if I actually finished saying what I was going to say about Phoebe, but yeah, it's just very interesting that we got to see that with Phoebe, which there is another conversation later between her and her superior in which he says, look, I get it. Like, I was with I had a CI who I also really thought we were kind of bonding, and I trusted him, and I shouldn't have trusted him, and he played me hard. Which I'm very curious about that story. I don't think they'll ever really elaborate on it unless his character, I believe that agent's name is Dave. I don't think they'll ever really elaborate on it, but its story did its purpose. And I think that is probably a hint to come that Phoebe could potentially become very close to the girls. The question is this a situation in which she's going to let them play her, or she will play them in the end? But I don't think the girls are necessarily stupid enough to fall for it, but I think it's almost a sense of foreshadowing in the future of the girls' relationship with Phoebe, although they don't really seem to be too keen on her, given that she is the agent trying to bust them. We got to see the interesting storyline with Stan play out in the designer bags and the counterfeit money, which also, backtracking a little bit, is the whole point of the robbery is that they were trying to gain the attention of the Secret Service in getting them more money to help them out, and that's what led Stan and Ruby to come up with the idea, more so Ruby, that if you can't tell that this cash is real or fake, then it's the same thing with the bags, and these bags are clearly fake. He put the proposition to the boss, and now they're stuck with like hundreds of fake designer bags. Which I think is I actually don't know if that's like against the law to sell fake designer bags. I'd imagine it is, but I imagine it's also something that's not really heavily enforced, but, nonetheless, I'm sure there are still plenty of laws about it. I could see that biting them in the butt, especially with Stan. That whole storyline aside, we got back to Annie, and, she tried to bribe the GED teacher, which is, once again, no matter how much Annie struggles, which just really paints her once again as a more realistic character. Everyone has their moments in which they break down, they give in, and they have setbacks, but, it doesn't necessarily matter about the setbacks as long as you continue to move forward. And so luckily she had a GED instructor who wasn't willing to let her cheat and pushed her to do what she had to do. Which, as we saw towards the end of the episode, when her and Ben got into yet again another argument, she did pass the prep course, and that she could potentially get her GED. But during the whole situation in leading up to her trying to figure out her results, Josh, her ex-therapist, came there on his, as he called it, stag night, which I guess is a British term for bachelor party. They have a lot of moments, and Annie was doing a really good job of keeping her distance. But then there was a moment in which she said, "Do you really want to be with me? Or is it just that you don't want to be with her?" And honestly, ever since their relationship was introduced back last season, I said that they didn't really fit together. They didn't really make sense, and I did not really see it as a real thing. But I think that line really cleared up any and all doubts that I was having in regards to the situation. I think we got our answer. He just did not want to be with the girl he was with. And it's unfortunate that he dragged it out that long, so hopefully he told her the truth in the end. But I feel like that's probably the end of that storyline, because once again, I think we need to see Annie's development more. She was like, not that, well, she is a bad girl in a sense, but not a bad person. But I do feel like that was his, like, temptation, is that there's this girl that's interested in me. She's definitely not what I'm used to, and I don't want this potential fake perfect life. So I think that's ultimately what that led to. we also had a lot of interesting stuff move forward with the Rio plotline, as obviously Beth is the highest connected to Rio, but Rio wants to introduce Beth to his boss, which ends up being his grandmom. And I guess if my understanding and pretty much the audience understanding of things is correct, Rio's family is the business, and they hide it really well. Which then, as you know, Rio was getting close to Beth, and they all could sense there was something between the two of them. She had to ditch the wire, but unfortunately, she ditched the freaking wire in the grandmom's bedroom, and I'm really hoping she grabbed that wire back. Which, who knows, but I'm sure also at the same time the wire might be recording. So, yeah, there's that. And I guess to sort of end it, we had a little storyline with Dean where Dean's obviously on house arrest. He can't do anything. He's got a 3-block radius, which is actually way more than I would have ever guessed. I really would have thought that the house arrest was limited to your own home, the property, and also if you're working, they'll allow you to, leave for work. But we got to see that he had a 3-block radius, and he kind of fantasized about, going on these bike rides with these guys that he see, bike multiple times a day, whether it's, during the day or at night. And there was something so innocent about that segment in which it felt very childlike, where he fixed up the bike and that's all he wanted to do. And I think the whole thing is an allegory, but the question is what is it an allegory for? Is it an allegory for freedom? To, get on your bike and just, ride on the open road, so to speak? Is it the fact that he got married young, had kids young, got stuck in a job that he only thought he'd be there for a year or so to, and so he lost a lot of sense of freedom and he lost his sense of life, despite him always doing what he thought to, generally speaking, cheating aside, to be the right thing to do. So I'm very much curious to see how that'll play out. And then we obviously saw at the very end of the episode, Beth told him something, and I couldn't tell if Dean was shocked, if he was angry, what was going on. So I'm very much curious to see what she told him, but I feel like she probably told him about the feds and everything going on with that. She might have told him everything, including Lucy. But I guess we'll find out, hopefully, on the next episode. On that note, we're going to take another break, and when we come back, we'll be talking about episode 2 of The Bad Batch.
Want to find out what movies to go see? Then check out the GSMC Movie Podcast. It's your ticket to the latest movies, whether it's a new blockbuster event, romantic, comedy, or action flick. This show has got it all covered. They talk some what to go see now, don't bother, what's hot on Netflix, and everything in between. That's GSMCpodcast.com/movie-podcast. When it's all about the movies, it has to be this new show. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
All right, and we're back. So, as usual, we talked about The Circle, episode 10 of season 2. We've talked about episodes 7 and 8 of Your Honor, and we've also talked about season 4, episode 6 of Good Girls. So now we are going to move on to The Bad Batch, which is Star Wars' newest animated show. This is episode 2, though. So we did talk about the pilot in the last podcast. But yeah, kind of getting right into it. In the pilot, we did have an hour and a half first episode. And, it almost acted as a TV movie. Whereas now that we're into like the normal episode, the non-setup, we had a 31-minute episode. At least I believe it was 31 minutes, which I think is honestly what we're probably looking at for the future of this season. Each of the episodes being probably 30 minutes, maybe with the finale being a little bit on the longer side. I just hope it's not as short as the Marvel shows have been. Obviously, just like the Marvel shows, it appears on Disney+. Ultimately, Star Wars, along with Marvel, is also owned by Disney. So I feel like we're going to be getting a very similar format in terms of time and even probably episode count. But as I have very quickly come to see, especially with The Mandalorian Season 1, Disney, in general, I feel like they, on their streaming service, they don't 100% know how to produce good short-form content. Not to say that anything that they've done so far that I've seen has been bad, but I think even Netflix, with its lesser shows, Netflix really knows how to deliver good short-form content. There's really no filler in a Netflix, 10-episode show or even an 8-episode show. Whereas, like, when they did The Mandalorian, there's quite a bit of filler content that really shouldn't be the case. And with the filler content, there might be, like, one small detail or one character that comes back. You could argue that it's not exactly filler, but also those episodes don't really drive the plot forward like they should. So, with that being said, also, there's the Clone Wars, which that final season, it is essentially an anthology series, and it worked very well on its own. But anyway, so we saw at the end of the last episode, the pilot episode, that the Bad Batch was talking, and more specifically, Hunter, the leader of the Bad Batch, said that they were going to go to an old contact. I believe is actually what they said, or an old friend, but I think they said an old contact. Which we don't really know anything about the Bad Batch. So I was, really trying to speculate what or who could the person be that they're going to go see. Now, in the episodes that we actually got of the Bad Batch in the Clone Wars, which was just the first 4 episodes of the final season of the Clone Wars, the one that did appear on Disney+, there was interaction with the 501st. But as we know, the 501st all had the inhibitor chips and they all turned on the Jedi. The only person who didn't turn was Rex, which actually Rex did turn, but then Ahsoka got the chip out of his brain. So my immediate assumption was they're going to go see Rex, but also given that given that he was with the 501st, given that he had the inhibitor chip, and given that everything that the Bad Batch knows, there's nothing that would actually indicate they would go see Rex. So, I myself, I don't like to do any real big digging around online for, like, official, stuff, because oftentimes, especially now, today, in today's day and age, we often get a lot of preemptive spoilers when it comes to cast and other things. Now, granted, all the clone troopers are voiced by D. Bradley Baker, who's very, very famous voice artist. I first probably ever knew him from Avatar: The Last Airbender, although I'm sure there are tons of shows that I watched as a kid I knew him from, but when I actually started to know who he was, it was when I watched Avatar: The Last Airbender. But, so we couldn't be spoiled on that front, but I didn't really look into anything. So we got the Bad Batch crew launching on, I think they said J19, that's where they were going, but that number means nothing to me. So when they actually got to the planet, we knew that it was Seleucami, and I knew the name sounded really familiar, and I was thinking to myself, okay, Seleucami definitely wasn't in any of the old movies. It wasn't in any of the newest movies or the prequel movies, so it has to be in the Clone Wars or Rebels. And then so they touched down on the planet, and I looked at the planet and I thought to myself, oh yeah, I do recognize this planet. This kind of looks like the planet where the group of bounty hunters were at, but I was actually wrong. The planet that Seleucami is the planet that Cut was from. Now, initially speaking, I did not actually remember who Cut was, full disclosure. I kind of, after the episode was going on for a little bit, remembered, and then I kind of did my research, and then it really actually came back to me. But Cut was one of the clone troopers. I think his storyline was back in season 2, where he was a part of a troop that got completely wiped out by the droids when they crash landed on that planet. And originally, I believe it was a planet that was free from the war. And I think that was the whole name of Seleucami. Seleucami, I think, was some sort of translation to Oasis, if I remember correctly. But yeah, so that was Cut, and then we saw that Cut had an interaction with Rex during the Clone Wars later, when a nice portion of the droid army and the 501st Legion took the fight to that planet to chase after Grievous, which that I feel like I remember even more, because then you had Rex find Cut and wanted to report Cut in for desertion, because obviously they're troopers and that's a very big part of who they are, and, their rank and order and, following protocols and stuff like that. But he ultimately chose not to turn him in due to Cut being with Sue and them having kids. So he has a little family. So at some point in time, we do know that the Bad Batch had to have had some sort of interaction with Cut on that planet. The question is who, what, when, where, how, what was the circumstances behind that? Because I'm 99% sure, unless I missed some sort of detail in the dialogue, they never actually explained how he knew Cut was there, which means that the Bad Batch had to have stumbled upon them, or stumbled upon Cut at one point or another. Which would then also indicate that Crosshair, who obviously is no longer a part of the Bad Batch, also knew that Cut was there. But we obviously did not see anything play out in that regard, because I feel like the Bad Batch does not really have a whole lot of options. Desertion's not really a thing that you often see with these clone troopers. So anyway, so yeah, we got Cut, we got Sue and the two kids, and it was very interesting to see Omega when she landed on the planet, because she had never left Kamino. She, to our knowledge, was never in a spaceship, and she most certainly, as we did find out at the end of last episode, she never was in space. So when she landed on this planet, being that she's only ever walked on, artificial structures, nothing from, well, I guess you could say steel is made from natural resources, but, she's never been on actual land, because Kamino is a completely ocean-based planet. And so she, kind of freaked out in the best way possible about dirt, and she got really excited about it, which it's funny, you could see that the clone troopers, they don't quite know how to handle it, but I think, they find it kind of endearing. So, for the most part, obviously Omega's a kid, and you generally don't get to see too much of her childlike innocence, at least from the first episode, except for her maybe natural sense of curiosity, as most of us do have as we're growing up, and, we do have a desire to learn things, although oftentimes it's a desire for the things we want to learn, not the things that we are taught to learn. So, aside from that, you almost kind of treat her as somewhat mature, but that Hunter-Omega father-daughter relationship is very much forming. And so, obviously, them stumbling upon Cut and this, little hidden village vibe really, 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 really reminded me of The Mandalorian. Now, I don't know if I said it on TV time or if I said it on the podcast last time, but I really do get episode 4 vibes from this, and I get the whole father-daughter relationship, or I guess in the sense of The Mandalorian, it was like a father-son relationship, this natural protector. But the really cool thing that we did get out of this episode was that Hunter himself, who, Cut is also a fellow trooper, just like Hunter is. And even Hunter, Cut, as he said multiple times throughout the episode, is like, yeah, you have to realize she is a kid, and you're used to commanding your troop, and we're used to following orders. With kids, it's a whole different, it's a whole different ball game. It's a whole different kind of struggle and fight. We were built to literally fight. And so that is what came easy to us. Whereas with this is not something we were raised with. There's no, and he didn't say it, but there is no societal expectations that they learn about being a father or a family person. At this point in time, the clone troopers, very few of them grew to old age. And in the instance that you did see someone like the janitor from the Clone Wars, I mean, his whole life was service. They never actually got to have a life. So there is that. So he's got a lot to learn. With also the whole Mandalorian thing, just like in episode 4 of The Mandalorian with the whole village, we also saw in this episode that Hunter did try and give Omega away, as he thought it was best for Omega to live a normal life amongst other kids. But in the end, different though from The Mandalorian, she chose the Bad Batch. And that is who she is sticking with. And because in the end of it, she is one of the, anomalies when it comes to the clones. And so she does belong in the Bad Batch, but I think also a shot at normal life was best with Cut. So another couple things too is we got to see a Nexu in which Omega almost got eaten by one, which is what Hunter originally was freaking out about, which is then why Cut said, you gotta remember she's a child. But the Nexu, I didn't even realize it until well after the episode was over, but we did actually see the Nexu in the second movie, one of the prequel movies, Attack of the Clones. It's one of those creatures on Geonosis that was trying to eat Padme, Anakin, and Obi-Wan. So that was actually kind of cool that we got to see that creature, because we never actually got to see the creature in anything else. We also got to see the, oh crap, what are those called? The, oh my gosh. Oh, chain codes. I knew it was code something. The chain codes. So the chain codes, it was actually a thing that was introduced in The Mandalorian. I think it was introduced back in season 1. I believe it was the primary way in which the bounty hunters could track criminals. But in this situation, we got to see the origin of the chain codes, and the chain codes were all created by the Galactic Empire to keep tabs on people. Now, it's funny, though, for a civilization or a galaxy as far technologically advanced as this one is, it's almost surprising they didn't have something like this. I don't quite understand how the chain codes work, because they've never dived too crazy into it. But I mean, we have social security cards, we have fingerprints in our, society. So it's interesting that we got to see the origin of the chain codes, and we even got to see the chain codes with, Boba and Jango, in which the chain code was implemented into their armor. Now, the only thing with that is Jango was, had died before the rise of the Galactic Empire, so maybe the chain code existed in some other way, but the chain code that we now know in the Star Wars universe, this is the origin of it. Couple other, points of note, or notes of point, or I guess more so just a single one, is that with Cut getting on that shuttle, I'm curious if he will pop back up into the story at all. I think, generally speaking, it's probably, if we look into the reality of the situation, it's probably not beneficial or going to be very good if he gets involved in the fight in any way, shape, or form. But it would be interesting if he does come back. But we had another interesting moment with him in which, as he was getting on the shuttle, he was almost identified by a fellow clone trooper, one that actually did have the inhibitor chip, but he got distracted with the whole Bad Batch, which actually, that brings me to another point, though, that I actually completely forgot about, is that what happened to Cut's inhibitor chip? Did Rex take it out? How would he take it out, given that they needed advanced technology to take out the inhibitor chips? If he saw a Jedi, would he try and kill the Jedi? How exactly would that work? We did not really get an answer to that, at least not one that I remember in the actual context of the show. So something to think about for the future. So I guess on that note, we're going to end it there. Thank you for listening to the GSMC Television Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'd like to ask that you please remember to subscribe to the show. Write a nice little review because it really helps us out. Also, if you could please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, it would be greatly appreciated. On that note, thank you and have a wonderful day.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Television Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.